Hi, everyone. Good afternoon.
No, I haven't started yet.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. We apologize for the technical difficulties and the late start. We will try and get this moving at this point so we don't take up too much of your time this afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Alliance's annual federal budget briefing. I'm Julie Klein, and I do federal advocacy work with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'll be joined by other Alliance staff today, including Kate Seiss, Policy Outreach Coordinator, Steve Berg, Vice President for Program and Policy, Ian Lisman, Program and Policy Analyst, and Sharon McDonald, Director for Families and Youth. In this webinar, we are going to talk about the President's fiscal year 2014 budget request, which was released yesterday. Before we delve into the content, though, please note that all of the lines will be muted during the briefing, but if you have questions at any point, you can send them to us through the webinar software. To do so, you'll find a box labeled Questions in the webinar panel at the right side of your screen that you can type your questions into, and we'll go over them at the end. We'll hopefully have enough time at the end of the briefing to answer many of the questions submitted. I also want to let everyone know that after the webinar is over, you'll receive an email with a link to all the materials from today's briefing, so don't worry about not having a copy of anything we mention on the call, and that email will also include a copy of the PowerPoint presentation we're using today, and we'll get a recording of the webinar up online as soon as we can. And also, if you note the link that you see on your screen to the webinar materials, you can find a variety of materials posted online right now, including the slides, and you'll see that at the top it says slides. So if you want to follow along that way, you can print those as well. Okay, so to get started, yesterday, April 10th, the administration released its budget proposal for fiscal year 2014, the upcoming fiscal year. And the purpose of today's briefing is to learn what's in the new budget proposal, how it impacts affordable housing and homelessness, and how we can work together to advance some key issues this year. Kate's going to start things off by providing a brief overview of the federal budget and appropriations process. Next, my colleagues will give a rundown of the President's fiscal year 2014 budget for key departments and programs. Steve will then discuss the budget and policy outlook for this year, and then Kate will wrap things up by explaining how you can get involved in 2013 to prevent and end homelessness. And finally, we'll go through and answer as many of your questions as we can. As you can see, we've got a lot to get through in just an hour, so bear with us, please, and we are more than happy to run a bit over the hour if there are a lot of questions, so don't worry, we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, now I'm going to pass this over to my colleague Kate Seiss, who will give us an overview of the federal budget and appropriations process.
Great, thank you, Julie. As Julie said, I'm the Policy Outreach Coordinator here at the Alliance, and I'm just going to be talking a little bit about the federal budget process and provide some background information on the President's budget proposal. Then I'll be going into some details on the budget proposal along with my colleagues from the Alliance's policy team. And yeah, as Julie said, later I will be talking about some advocacy efforts. To start off, as those of you that have been involved in advocacy for a few years know, this year the President's budget was delayed significantly. It normally comes out the first Monday in February, but this year, because of the fiscal cliff, sequestration, and fiscal year 2013 wrapping up just a few weeks ago, the administration made the decision to delay the release of the budget until yesterday, April 10th. Typically, the release of the President's budget proposal usually marks the start of the federal budget and appropriations processes for the next fiscal year. And just to be clear, when I say fiscal year, I mean the federal fiscal year, which refers to the period October 1 through September 30th. So right now, we're currently in the midst of FY13, and FY 2014 will begin on October 1st of this year. Again, this year things went a little bit differently. Because of the big delay in the President's budget, the House and Senate actually began the FY 2014 process first. So both the House and Senate released budget resolutions last month, and budget resolutions are similar to the President's budget proposal in that they are not law. They're simply guidelines to work within as they move forward in the funding and budget process. Both the House, Senate, and President's budgets set the guidelines and visions for how those three entities want the federal budget to function, what they want funded, and generally how they want the federal budget's federal government money spent or not spent, as the case may be. It's important to note that the House and Senate released very different budget resolutions. And this matters because it sort of offers the President the opportunity to come in and find some middle ground and offer some concrete proposals instead of the loftier, bigger picture outlines of the congressional budget resolutions. So we'll get a little more into the role the President's budget plays in just a few minutes. I'm going to quickly explain what the process of President's budget to final funding levels looks like this year, so you have a better idea of the next steps throughout the year. As I mentioned, the House and Senate already released and passed their individual budget resolutions. These were really just guidelines and didn't go into nearly the same amount of detail as the President's budget proposal. So really, the House and Senate will still be using the President's budget, again, as a guideline as they move forward in the process. This year, things are also a little bit different because normally the budget resolutions passed by the House and Senate lay out the overall spending level for the federal government. But for the next 8 years, this is actually already done for them. They laid out those amounts in the Budget Control Act that passed in August 2011 that we've been talking a lot about when we talk about the fiscal cliff and sequestration. This Budget Control Act laid out these overhauling top-line numbers for all federal funding for the next 8 years or so. So that big top-line number is what they are working with. Now, the Appropriations Committee in both the House and Senate will take that big number, which is in the trillions, the big number, and divide it among their various subcommittees. The House and Senate are, of course, likely to do that sort of division differently, and they certainly have in the past. So the Senate Appropriations, for example, the Senate Appropriations Committee could agree to give a certain number, a certain funding level to the HUD subcommittee, while the House Appropriations Committee could decide to give a different number to its HUD subcommittee. Subcommittees, I should note, are each charged with deciding the funding levels for certain federal agencies and specific programs, like those within the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Health and Human Services. So once the subcommittees get their number from the full committee, they then provide funding for specific programs by writing and passing appropriations bills. For example, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Subcommittee is charged with funding McKinneyVento Homeless Assistance Grants, Section 8, and other federal housing programs. It's divided in such a way and down to that sort of specific level of department by department because it's really impossible for anyone on the Appropriations Committee to have a solid grasp of all the programs in the federal government. So splitting the committee into subcommittees sort of allows them to focus on a specific group of programs over which they have jurisdiction. Before the funding levels become law, the appropriations bills must be passed by not just the appropriations subcommittees, but also the full Congress. So both the House and Senate must approve, and then, of course, they get signed into law by the President. After talking about how unique the start of the year is, I do want to emphasize that we're kind of hoping that from here on out we might be back to a more normal process. As I mentioned, the FY 2013 process wrapped up just a few weeks ago, which is nearly 6 months late. And what we've been hearing from the talk of the members of the Appropriations Committee in both the House and Senate is that they're sort of eager to get back on track and back to a normal process, which will hopefully be devoid of these bigger budget issues. Of course, that remains to be seen, but we're anticipating and hoping that they'll make some progress in moving this process forward in a timely manner this year. And again, this budget process is really definitely confusing, so please feel free to enter any questions you have into the box, the questions box, and we'll do our best to answer them. And I would like to note, this is certainly not something you need to memorize. The Alliance will definitely keep you abreast of all these developments, let you know what's happening, where the process is, when things are moving forward, and of course how key programs, homeless assistance and housing programs, are faring in the process. To get back to the role of the President's budget proposal, what it is and why it matters, just to reiterate, it is not law. It is a guide, and Congress ultimately makes the decisions about what goes into the bills. So while we do try and impact the President's budget to the best of our ability, and we definitely got some good news from the President this year, most of our work is focused on securing support from members of Congress, which is why, of course, all of you are so critical to this appropriations process. Senators and representatives really rely on all of you guys for information about funding for housing and homelessness programs. And they're much more likely to push for funding increases when they understand the direct impact the funding has on real programs and, of course, people in their own districts. So we really hope to continue all the excellent work from our field, from all of you guys, as we take a firm step into FY 2014 appropriations process. And really, just to reiterate, we can't impact any of these numbers without your help. So now I'm going to pass it briefly over to my colleague, Steve Berg, who is our Vice President for Programs and Policy here at the Alliance. And he's going to give us just a brief, broad overview of the President's budget. Steve?
All right, thanks, Kate, and thanks everyone on the call for attending today. I know sometimes this is a lot of information, but we really rely on the people in this network who care about these programs and are willing to make the effort to go sell them on the Hill. The overall budget today, the budget that came out yesterday, we're sort of going through that and trying to get a handle on all the complications and the details in there. It looks like the President has really put out a document that tries to deal with the problems there have been with federal spending over the last year or so. It's a proposal to undo sequestration, to put other kinds of deficit reduction measures in its place, and then to really focus on a few key initiatives to help the middle class and also to help people who are at the bottom economically try to improve their lives and really care for the most vulnerable people. And among those things, there is definitely an emphasis on homelessness and doing something good about it. Just to give you a quick update on 3 agencies that we're going to be talking most about today. HUD, of course, is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Its budget actually includes quite a bit of increase. It makes up for it sort of makes up for the cuts that they took last year from sequestration and some of the other cuts they had taken the year before, really emphasizing a couple of priorities. One is to keep people in the housing they're in now in Section 8 and in public housing, and to expand housing opportunities for the most vulnerable people, including homeless people. We'll get into the details there later. And also there's a several-part new initiative to try to assist some of the most distressed communities, some of the communities that have been hit hardest by the economic downturn, building on an initiative the President talked about in his State of the Union address to pick out 20 communities and really try to improve the way that federal programs work and the impact of federal programs on the economy and on poverty in those communities. VA, of course, has been an exception to the general downturn in federal funding. VA's funding, for a number of reasons, has been protected from sequestration and protected from some of the downturns locally. And the VA's budget includes important improvements in their funding for homeless programs and really continues to keep the VA on track on its plan to end veterans' homelessness by the end of 2015. And then finally, the Department of Health and Human Services, there's a number of different small targeted programs on that are important to homelessness, really targeted toward homeless people in HHS. And then even more important probably is the larger programs that are mandatory programs like Medicaid, like TANF, where the administration is trying to do some work to make those programs more useful and to have key roles in ending homelessness. The HHS budget proposal largely undoes the cuts that sequestration caused and then really concentrates on things like implementing the Medicaid expansions that were in the Affordable Care Act. So let me at this point, that's the overview. Let me at this point turn it back to Kate to walk through some of the details of the HUD budget proposal.
Thank you, Steve. As Steve just said, we're going to spend some time and go through the details of the President's budget as it relates to key homelessness, affordable housing, and low-income programs. Of course, we don't have time to go through all the hundreds of programs that are relevant to your work, but we have pulled out some of the key ones to give you a snapshot. So before I turn things over to my colleagues to talk about VA and HHS, I'm going to talk about the HUD portion of the budget proposal. So first and foremost, we want to focus on HUD's McKinneyVento Homeless Assistance Grants. And as you can see up on your screen, the administration proposed a tremendous 19% increase for HUD's McKinneyVento Homeless Assistance Grants over the final FY 2013 level to $2.381 billion. Which is really a tremendous show of support and really speaks to the great work you're all doing. In its explanation of this funding request, HUD specifically cited its commitment to implementing both the HEART Act and making progress toward the goals laid out in the Federal Strategic Plan to Prevent and End Homelessness. So as you can also see on your screen, the $2.381 billion includes some pretty exciting things, including $346 million for the Emergency Solutions Grant, which is a pretty hefty increase over the about $190 million level in FY 2013. And that 346 also includes $60 million for competitive grants targeted toward high-need urban areas to do exclusively rapid rehousing activities. So we're really excited about that, and it really shows the commitment by the administration to invest in rapid rehousing efforts. This funding level would also be enough to fund all continuum of care renewals and a modest amount for new projects, which they note will be focused on permanent supportive housing. So this funding level would really help us make significant progress implementing the HEART Act, and given the tight budget constraints we're under, again, this is a really big commitment from HUD to make progress toward the goals in the Federal Strategic Plan. So we're really excited about this. So to turn to some other HUD programs, starting with the Section 8 Housing Choice Vouchers, the budget proposal includes a pretty hefty increase to the tenant-based rental assistance from the FY 2013 levels. This level would maintain nearly all vouchers, though further analysis of that $20 billion is still needed to sort of assess the exact impact of that level on after sequestration and after some other budget issues. The legislation would also include funding for new HUD VA vouchers, and my colleague Ian will talk about the details of that in a few minutes when he reviews the veterans programs. It also included a significant increase in administrative fees over last year, which has been a big concern for many PHAs. And about 2 years ago, I think, they changed how they funded the Section 811 program, and renewals were moved into the TVRA account. So this budget proposal also includes $111 million to renew mainstream vouchers, originally funded through Section 811. The other thing I want to mention is that the budget proposal does include a series of legislative proposals around reforming tenant-based rental assistance, or the Section 8 program. And you can find out more about those in our budget rundown, which is on our website. You'll be able to find it. It goes into a little more detail. And I'm sure that we, along with our partners like the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and and CSH, will be putting out more information on Section 8 reform as it moves along in the coming weeks and months. So next, to turn to a few other programs of interest, public housing capital will be increased to $1.979 billion, and public housing operating would go up to $4.56 billion. The administration is also proposing, once again, to combine these two programs into a single funding stream, which would allow PHAs to use both funds for any eligible capital or operating expense. They did this last year as well, and that didn't move forward. They also proposed a pretty significant increase to the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, to nearly $400 million. And in addition, the administration also includes about $200 million for a neighborhood revitalization initiative that would focus on their new promise zones. And again, you can find more about all these points and all these programs in our budget proposal rundown that's on our website. So both Home and CDBG have received substantial cuts in the past few years, and the President's budget, again, actually slightly decreases the proposed funding levels for each of those programs once more. Elderly housing, also known as Section 202, actually receives a pretty decent proposed increase to $398 million, up from $355 million in FY 2013. So that's the broad strokes of the budget, the HUD budget, and as a reminder, we will be taking questions at the end, but feel free to type them into the questions box whenever you get a chance. So now I'm going to turn things over to Ian Listman to talk about the administration's Homeless Veteran Initiatives. Ian?
All right. Thanks, Kate. Okay, so just kind of a quick overview. So last year there was a pretty big increase in the Veterans budget, in the Veterans Affairs budget. So this year we see a $1.4 billion budget. It's a slight increase, but it basically carries over the 30% increase from last year. We kind of expected this based on the last year's advance appropriations. They kind of signaled that they would be continuing forward. Basically, this budget is showing an ongoing commitment by VA into ending veterans homelessness by 2015. Next slide, please. And here you can see this graph that we have. It's showing that the investments are paying off. Early indications from this year's point in time are showing that there's probably going to be some continued reductions in veterans homelessness. The projected number of 40,000 homeless veterans for this year, for 2013, it's going to keep the VA on track by ending veterans homelessness by 2015. The SSBF program, it's kind of the leading edge of the VA plan to end homelessness among veterans and their families. This program uses rapid rehousing and prevention, which is a lower cost and lower touch intervention. This is the same level of funding as last year's budget, and again, this was a rather large increase last year, and they're carrying that increase over this year. So again, this is signaling the commitment to this new program model, which has been quite effective. The HUD VA program, as Kate mentioned earlier, is going to receive an additional 10,000 permanent supportive housing vouchers recommended under this budget. This also includes an increase, as you can see here, to the case management portion of this program. HUD actually, also their budget has a $75 million recommendation, which will also fund these vouchers. These are long-term rental subsidies for chronically homeless veterans and other high-need veterans. This will keep the VA on track to ending veterans homelessness in the time frame that they've projected. The Grant Per Diem program, GPD, it's a transitional housing model. The VA signaled last year that they're encouraging grantees to transition their Grant and Per Diem programs into permanent housing. This is still the plan and ongoing process. There's other housing available, particularly SSBF, which is relatively new. So for some veterans, Grant Per Diem is no longer the only program model available to them. So we will be seeing some changes in this grant in the coming years. And finally, so there's other programs that are affected by sequestration, as was mentioned earlier. The VA programs were immune from sequestration. This wasn't the case for the Department of Labor Veterans Program. This is the HVRP, the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program. So the fiscal year 13 funding level will be cut by about $2 million under sequestration. So this year's budget represents a slight increase over that sequestered amount. This program helps homeless veterans obtain and keep employment through assistance, training, equipment, and other fundings. It's been a very successful program. And with that, I will hand it over to Sharon McDonald, and she will discuss the Health and Human Services budget.
Great. Thank you very much, Ian. Thanks, everyone, for listening in. As Steve mentioned in the opening, when we're looking at HHS, we're looking at both programs that are specifically targeted to homeless people, including some of the highest risk and most vulnerable homeless people, and formerly homeless people who are living in permanent supportive housing, the supportive services funded out of HHS programs. We're also looking at mainstream resources and other programs that serve low-income and highly vulnerable people who, and which resources could be better utilized or utilized to provide a safety net so that people don't become homeless and so that we're restoring people back to housing as quickly as possible. So first, looking at the programs serving homeless children and youth, largely throughout HHS, what we're finding is that the President's budget largely restores funding to the FY 2012 level. So it's representing an increase over FY 2013 the amounts that were subjected to sequestration, so they're all an increase over FY 2013, but it's really just getting the funding streams back on track to FY 2012. So the runaway and homeless youth is flat funded from the 2012 level at $115 million, $53 million for basic centers, $44 million for transitional living programs, sorry about the abbreviation there, and $18 million for street outreach. Something that hasn't been requested in the past that we've looked for in the past is funding for an incidence and prevalence study so that we have a better understanding of the dynamics and the characteristics of young people who experience homelessness and what that looks like. And we really believe that data can help shape the response. So we're happy to see that amount there. Though, of course, we do know that these programs are hugely already oversubscribed, so there's no need to wait for the data to invest more resources in RHYA programs. The Education of Homeless Children and Youth Act programs, this is the program that helps young people stay connected to school, is flat funded from the FY 2012 level at $65 million. Okay, next slide. There are some new investments in the HHS budget that's worth knowing about. There's a $6 million increase over the FY 2012 funded level for the family violence prevention and services. There's a significant increase to child care, a 9% increase, and a very large increase in Head Start services, which are targeted to very young children, which of course comprises a big segment of our homeless population, so they could really benefit from this. Next slide. And of course, there are some cuts. The Domestic Violence Transitional Housing Program, which is actually housed in the Department of Justice, has a 25% decrease over what was provided in FY 2012. LIHEAP has a 19% decrease over 2012. LIHEAP is the Low-Income Heat and Energy Assistance Program, which helps low-income people afford heat and cooling assistance, and almost a half cut, almost a 50% cut to the Community Services Block Grant Program, which provides poverty alleviation activities, funding for poverty alleviation in poor communities. Next slide, please. So looking at the behavioral health program specifically, the President's budget for these programs next year is generally leveled, again, compared to FY 2012. For example, restoring $4 million in sequestration funding for the programs for assistance and transitions to housing, or the PATH program. So the PATH program would receive $65 million, and other targeted homeless programs within the SAMHSA account for another $74 million. This is the budget that funds services in supportive housing and grants for the benefits of homeless individuals. The SAMHSA mental health block grant would be funded at around the same as the FY 2012 level as well, about $22 million more than is available under sequestration this year. These are the programs that support state-funded behavioral health efforts. The SAMHSA block grant, the substance abuse block grant is increased substantially to $1.8 billion compared to the 2013 amount under sequestration, which is $1.7 billion. Next slide, please. So turning to other important HHS health programs, the community health centers would receive $2.7 billion for FY 2014, including $1.25 billion in mandatory funding for health centers under the Affordable Care Act of 2010. The budget requests an additional $1.47 billion in discretionary funding for health centers. The $1.47 billion request includes approximately $60 million more than the amount available this year under across-the-board sequestration. Based on these requests, health care for the homeless program funding would be $236 million in FY 2014. The Ryan White HIV/AIDS program would have an increase from $2.21 billion to $2.38 billion. The health centers in the HIV/AIDS program are administered within HHS by the Health Resources and Services Administration. Finally, you should be aware that federal spending will continue to implement key parts of the Affordable Care Act, including the Medicaid expansion that will mean better access for vulnerable homeless people in states that opt to expand. And I will turn it back to Kate, I believe.
And I will turn it over to Steve to talk about sort of the policy outlook for 2013.
All right, great. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everybody for giving all those details. So those are the details. And now we're going to turn a little bit to sort of what this all means for us and what we're going to be doing about it. The budget proposal, of course, to repeat what's been said many times already, this is just the proposal for fiscal 2014. The final decisions are made by the U.S. Congress, and as everyone is aware, the politics are such that the U.S. Congress has some virulent disagreements with the President over priorities. So that's what we're going to have to be wading through. The one thing I can say, the one big picture thing to take from this budget is it reflects the value that the White House and the Office of Management and Budget put on these homeless programs. And this is not something new. This is something that dates back to the Bush administration as well. The Bush administration and the Obama administration have both consistently requested increases in funding for homeless programs. The reason is because they see the work that people are doing in the field, and they know that when money goes to these programs, good things happen. And that's huge credit to people on this call, to everybody who's working in this field. And you know, sometimes the things that HUD pushes, the things that other people push to make the programs more efficient, more effective, creates a lot of work for people in the field, but it pays off at times like this. So I think that's a major thing to take from this and a message to continue to give to the U.S. Congress. This budget is a proposal, and it's also for fiscal 2014, which, as Kate explained, doesn't start until October of 2013. In the meantime, we've got the immediate problems to deal with. Sequestration has taken effect. Programs are being cut. The public housing and Section 8 programs in many communities are, at best, they've stopped issuing renewal vouchers when these vouchers turn over. And in many communities, they're talking about taking vouchers away from people who are now using them to rent. That's just going to put more pressure on homeless systems. It's extremely important that communities document the impacts of these cuts to Section 8, to public housing, to other federally funded programs, and to the homelessness programs, and let members of Congress know this is what's happening in your community. So we have to use that as an illustration of why the increased funding, as in the President's budget proposal, is important. The work that we do, the work that all of us do to secure increased funding is particularly important this year. I mean, I think our thinking at the Alliance right now is that this year, fiscal 2014, and you know, the year we're in right now is going to be especially important. I mean, I think we've come to a point where we've come through 5 years of very bad economic news. We have, as a group, people in this field have clawed and scraped to do the best they can with difficult funding situations, that have managed to do something which is quite amazing. And times when poverty has increased by 20%, when the number of people unemployed has gone up substantially, we've managed to keep the number of people living on the streets and living in shelters from going up. And in fact, in those parts of the homelessness problem where the federal government has invested the most and invested the smartest, as in with veterans and with chronic homelessness, the numbers have continued to go down, even in this worst economic situation in many, many years. That being said, a big part of the reason for that was additional federal funding through the HPRP program, as well as through other areas. And the HPRP, as of course everyone knows only too well is now a thing of the past. And the idea that we were going to fill in for HPRP with new investments in McKinney and ESG, for example, that hasn't come to pass yet. Now, the HUD budget proposal has a very specific proposal to increase ESG, to do more rapid rehousing. I think it's very specifically with the idea of funding those rapid rehousing efforts that communities got started in HPRP. That's something that's a sort of a nuance of this funding that people in Congress aren't going to really know is there unless the people who are doing the work tell them it's there. This budget proposal talks about increases in funding for permanent supportive housing. We know we've come a long way on the issue of getting the most disabled people who have lived on the streets for years and years off the streets and into supportive housing. It's a cost-effective intervention. People accept that it's a cost-effective intervention, and yet we've sort of slowed down in terms of the provision of new permanent supportive housing. Things have slowed down. The McKinney funding for the new programs has slowed down. The idea of using turnover vouchers from Section 8, turnover vouchers are going to be very hard to come by, at least for the immediate future. So we need to finish that job and get the additional supportive housing on track so that we can get these very vulnerable individuals, very vulnerable families off the streets and into housing. These are the messages we've got to convey to Congress. We think that it's doable, even in spite of all the disagreement and the fighting over the big budget issues. We think that there is a long history of bipartisan agreement about the effectiveness of these homeless programs. Some of the messages, the really sort of finely tuned messages about the smaller programs like these homeless programs, have gotten lost in the big noise about the big budget problems. We're hoping that the big budget problems are mainly sort of resolved. I mean, there will be an uptick in that in sort of later in the spring when they deal with when Congress deals with the debt limit increases that are needed. Once that's over, then we'll be back to the regular appropriations process with people taking more of a look at the program, saying, well, we only have this much to spend. What are the priorities going to be? What are the things that really work? What are the things that help people who really need the help? And we think, as always, that we've got a strong case to be made here, but it only works if the people who are familiar with this in the field can tell their elected representatives, this is what's going on in your community and this is the help we need. So that's what the Alliance takes a lot of pride in the work we do to help you convey that message to members of Congress. And I think the rest of this webinar is going to be about that, about what we can do this year to make sure that the kind of confidence that has been expressed in us by the administration and by past administrations in their budget requests gets turned into a reality that will mean fewer people homeless and more people housed. So with that, to launch into that part of our campaign around this, let me turn it back to Kate for the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Steve. So as Steve mentioned, it's a really important time to get involved, so I'm going to talk about, of course, how we do that. So as he noted, a big part of our work at the Alliance is to work with our partners across the country to impact top federal policy priorities around preventing and ending homelessness, of course. And we send out updates and work with communities and to help make you guys, your advocacy efforts easier, better, et cetera, et cetera. So as we just heard from Steve, it's particularly important over the coming months to make sure we all work together to educate Congress on the importance of these programs and make sure that they prioritize affordable housing and homelessness programs. So over the last several years, Congress and the administration have shown that they place an enormous value on our collective work to end homelessness. We've definitely seen that. And we need to work with Congress to ensure that that prioritization continues this year. So to talk about impacting your policy priorities year-round, there are a lot of ways to impact your community's policy priorities throughout the year. And a couple of key ones include, being strategic and, of course, working with the Alliance and asking us for help, and prioritizing your work by thinking about what sort of impact you can have. So when thinking about your advocacy and what you want to do and how you want to approach it, ask yourself, does your senator or representative sit on committees working on these issues? Have they supported something similar in the past? Is this an issue that's actually likely to advance this year? We have an advocacy toolkit. In addition to sort of thinking about that, we have an advocacy toolkit that can actually provide guidance in a lot of detail as you undertake almost any type of advocacy this year. And you can find that advocacy toolkit on our website, and it's a really great tool to help you. And then, of course, as I said, you can reach out to me and work with the Alliance, and I'm happy to help you with any of your efforts. And we have a lot of other things besides the toolkit that we put out to help you with your efforts throughout the year. And as I discussed earlier, the federal budget process can be sort of complicated. So really the best way to stay up to date on current opportunities is to sign up for one of our advocacy email lists. You can sign up for the Advocacy Update, which sort of provides up-to-date info about a range of key issues Congress is considering. And you can do that on our homepage, endhomelessness.org, pretty easily in the Sign Up for Our Newsletter box on our homepage. And I'm sure many of you already subscribe to that. More specifically, you can sign up for our working groups, which this year will focus on HUD McKinneyVento funding and VA homelessness funding. These groups get regular updates about what is happening in D.C. and how various proposals would affect these specific programs, as well as, of course, opportunities to get involved on these issues. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more about those in a minute and launch a poll, which will give you an opportunity to sign up for those lists. So in 2013, we will be doing a lot of work on a wide range of federal policy issues over the course of the year. A complete list of the Alliance's 2013 policy priorities is available on our website, and you can see the link is listed on your screen. So if you go to that webpage, you'll see our full list of administrative and congressional policy priorities. But I do want to spend just a few minutes to provide a quick overview of two particularly high priorities that the Alliance will be focusing on this year, and we hope you'll work with us on. So as I noted, we'll be working a lot on securing this $2.381 billion for McKinney-Vento homeless assistance grants, as well as working to ensure that VA continues its push to end homelessness among veterans by 2015. Finally, we'll be focusing on our continued efforts to ensure that youth are better connected to families and services, and that we continue to get a better handle on the scope and depth of the problem. So as many of you have already noticed, we've already sort of launched or soft launched our FY 2014 campaigns with some emails about congressional sign-on letters, but we'll be making a more official rollout next week, and we'll include a lot more information about how you can get your members of Congress to sign on to those, what's called Dear Colleague or Congressional Sign-On Letter in support of that $2.381 billion number. So to start with the campaigns, we'll of course be doing a McKinney-Vento campaign to ensure that we secure the $2.381 billion requested in this budget proposal. And because the President proposed such a big increase, we have a serious opportunity here. We can use the administration's proposal to leverage our work with Congress and ask them to also prioritize implementation of the HART Act and replace HPRP with ESG and invest in other proven solutions like permanent supportive housing. So again, as you can see up on your screen, we've actually created a specific website for this campaign, and it will be kept up to date with the latest news, key resources, a summary of what advocacy help is needed at the moment, and any sample materials like letters or talking points that can assist you. So of course, we'd love to have you join us in the McKinney campaign. So I'm going to right now launch a poll that will give you an opportunity. And you should see it up on your screen right now. If you just go ahead and enter one of those options, it asks if you would like to join our McKinney campaign. And from there, if you say yes or maybe, we'll follow up with you. We'll make sure we get your email and can follow up with you and make sure you get involved in all the efforts. So I'll leave that up there for just a few seconds so everyone gets an opportunity to enter their answer. And again, if you're not sure, we'll follow up, or you can definitely, my contact information will be up at the end, and you can go ahead and email me at any point or call me. So I'll give you just a few more seconds, and then we'll close that. Okay, thank you, everyone. Our second big advocacy campaign will be around VA's Zero Homelessness Initiative. As Ian discussed in detail, the VA has set a goal of ending homelessness among veterans by 2015. And this budget, again, really demonstrates its commitment to reaching that goal and making sure that we end homelessness by the end of 2015. As such, we plan to work with the administration, Congress, and our partners across the country, like all of you, to support this budget request in order to make sure that we reach this goal. We're particularly excited about how much VA hopes to build on lessons learned from the broader homeless assistance systems, and we've already sort of seen that happening, so we're glad to see that it's going to continue. And we'd love to work with you to engage Congress and your other partners in the community working to end veteran homelessness. So the goal is to reach out to members of Congress, again, in support of these funding levels and to educate your members of Congress on the importance of the goal and that it's achievable. And once again, you'll see that this campaign has its own webpage as well, so we'll make sure that that's available to you. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll about getting involved. So in the next minute or so, if you could enter whether or not you'd like to be added to the Homeless Veterans FY 2014 campaign working group. And I'll put that up there. And feel free to say that you're not sure. We'll definitely follow up and make sure that you get looped in and have all the information you need to make your decision. I'll leave it up for just a few more seconds, so if you haven't entered your answer yet, go ahead and do so. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. All right. So to wrap things up, once again, my contact information is on the screen there. You can shoot me an email or give me a call at any time if you have any questions about sort of this President's budget proposal, the budget and appropriations process in general, or, of course, advocacy. We really look forward to working with you all throughout the year on these and other important policy priorities for preventing and ending homelessness. Again, please don't hesitate to be in touch with me if anyone at the Alliance can be helpful in any way. As Steve mentioned, advocacy is becoming increasingly important in our efforts to prevent and end homelessness. And so far, with the release of this budget, we're off to a pretty good start. This week's news really demonstrates what a value the administration places on your efforts really every single day to prevent and end homelessness. And we want to live up to that expectation and, of course, build upon it by educating Congress on how important and successful that work is. So working together, we're really optimistic that we'll be able to make some real progress this year in ending homelessness, and we definitely look forward to working with you on this critical effort. So thanks again, and with that, I will turn it over to Julie, who will help us answer some of your questions.
Great, thanks,
Julie?
Kate. As a reminder, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint slides and other materials from this webinar very shortly, and we'll also post a recording of the webinar as soon as possible on our website at www.endhomelessness.org. All right, at this point, I think we can turn to respond to some questions that were submitted throughout the webinar. The first question we have today is for Steve. And that question is sequestration taken into account in the President's budget proposal?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. Is sequestration taken into account in the President's budget proposal?
Yes, the President's budget proposal is based on the assumption that sequestration is reversed. So that allows them to propose spending levels at a little higher level than they would have otherwise. Now, of course, that's going to be a very controversial thing when it comes to Congress, but the President is very clear that sequestration is bad policy. So his budget proposal is to undo the last round of sequestration cuts, the 5% across-the-board cut that hit every domestic spending program, and replace that with other deficit reduction measures that are spelled out in other parts of his budget.
Great, thanks, Steve. And the next question is for you as well, and that is, what are the 20 communities that the President is targeting in his budget proposal that you mentioned?
They haven't made that public yet, but it's they have said they're going to be targeting communities that have been hit hardest by the recession. But it will be looking for the details of that, hopefully coming soon.
Great, thanks. And this question could be for you as well, or Kate. Could you confirm the total HUD budget number for FY 2014?
Yes, let me...
Oh, you got it, Kate. Okay,
I think I have it right in front of me. Sorry.
We can also come back to this if you'd prefer.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
So the President's budget in FY 2014 provides $47.6 billion, which is an increase of $4.2 billion, or 9.7% above the 2012 enacted level. So it's important to note that it's not over the last year's funding level, it's over the 2012 level. But the total top line number is $47.6 billion. So it's an increase from 2012, and as such would also be an increase from 2013, because 2013 had a lower number even still. So $47.6 billion.
Great, thanks so much, Kate. And the next question is for Sharon, and it is, could you talk a bit more about what the incidence and prevalence study is?
Sure. You know, when the last time they reauthorized the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, Congress directed the administration to do a study to come up with the incidence and prevalence of homelessness among young people. And you know, for years they haven't requested the money to put this in, or there's been some thought about carving the money out of the ASPE or the research budget. We don't really have the parameters of what the study would be, necessarily how they would do it, or I certainly don't. But the idea would be probably something not unlike what Marty Burt did in the 1990s that gave us our first big comprehensive look at homelessness among the adults. This would give us our first big comprehensive look about homelessness among young people.
Thanks, Sharon. And I think we have time for one last question, and this question is for Ian. And the question is, are the VASH funds taken out of the general McKinney pool? Could that have any impact on resources for other populations?
No, the VASH funds are separately set aside. They're actually part of the Section 8 pool, the HUD part of VASH. The HUD VASH is rent subsidy from HUD and then money for case management from the Department of Veterans Affairs. So those are it's a Section 8 voucher. It's not McKinney at all, and it's separately appropriated by Congress in addition to the regular Section 8 program. So we don't believe it's taken money away from any other homeless resource. We think it really is a solid addition to the resources that HUD has available.
Thanks, Steve. Okay. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I think that's about all the questions we're going to have time for today. But if you have any further questions regarding the content of the webinar, again, please don't hesitate to email them to Kate. Thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.